Hey, Qweerty Gamers Nation. I am excited to be here. My name is Danny Burke. I'm the board president of Qweerty Gamers. And today we have a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I'm super excited to be talking about and discussing PTSD Awareness Month with Mariya Milan from Chosen Family Therapy. And so, Mariya, introduce yourself. Who are you?
Hi, my name is Mariya Milan. I'm a registered associate marriage and family therapist under the license of JS Very. So basically, I'm currently seeing clients, getting hours for licensure, and working with LGBTQ folks in California.
Nice. So, just a quick clarification. So, as you go through your training, what would be
Mhm.
the difference then between your training and then once you're then fully certified?
Um, the basically the experience. Essentially, in California, you have a certain amount of hours one must log before full licensure. So you basically see an associate with the understanding that they're working towards full licensure.
Mhm.
So technically, I'm still learning. I mean, you always are, but that's the distinct difference. It's also that I'm under the supervision of somebody who's fully licensed. So as opposed to a legit MFT, which is a marriage and family therapist, fully licensed with the state, they don't need to be supervised by anyone above them. They just see clients. But for me, if a client issue comes up or if I have questions, I have a supervisor who's privy to all that information and just basically gives me like Yoda-esque advice.
So it doesn't really. I mean, like, so you know what you're talking about. You
Yes.
just have
Oh,
backup
yes, yes,
if needed, and you're under
yes.
somebody else's licensure to make sure that you're legal until you've got enough hours.
Yeah, your girl got a degree. Um, I was like top class. I
Woo!
know my stuff. It's one of those things where it's like even the best of superheroes needs that person in the back, you know? So
Mhm.
I it's one of those things where it's here to support me as I get my like land leg, so they say.
Love it. So then before we go into the topic of PTSD Awareness Month,
Mm.
what makes you so passionate and excited about connecting with Qweerty gamers? How do you see yourself like fitting into passion here?
So my biggest thing is I am a gamer and I want to offer to clients gaming and geek specific therapy. So a lot of the therapy that I offer really goes with the preconceived notion that gaming is a curative factor. And I like to call it the modern language of play. There's a concept in play therapy that the language of play is most comfortable to a lot of younger children. I like to age that up and say that gaming is the modern language of play. So a lot of folks feel comfortable in the gaming verse. They feel confident. They feel competent. And so by integrating that into the therapy process, not only does it get an inherent trust in skill, but it also gets like an understanding. Like, I want to know what an individual's favorite game is and why, what their favorite anime MC is, things like that. And it also gives respect to the fact that in our modernizing society, games are quite important. There's such large parts of folks' lives, especially in the LGBTQ plus community. So I have passion because, as I said, your girl likes to game personally, and it like excites me to talk about these things. Also, to see, oftentimes people will find that it's difficult to do things in the real world, right? It's hard to socialize, it's hard to feel like you've made an impact in the world. However, you can go home and play like Persona, and there you have like five social links that you are successful with. You can date girls, you can date dudes, you can do whatever you want, and you're able to do so successfully.
Mhm.
So being able to say, okay, these things aren't unobtainable because you did them. And if you did them in game, how can we integrate those skills into how you function in real life? So offering people that is why I'm so passionate.
What I love about a couple things that you said is one, I think oftentimes, well, one side of mainstream media, right, and one
Mm,
side of the house likes to present gaming as if it perpetuates violence, as
yep.
opposed to gaming having the opportunity to perpetuate therapeutic healing and just a sense of identity within somebody themselves, like empowerment, right? So one, I
Yes.
really love the turnaround on that, in which you bring a new thought and new process of thinking towards gaming in this like therapy, healing, empowerment lens. And then personally, I just identify with the fact that like I have always used gaming as a queer person of color to find a space, whether it was in online play or whether it was like literally in my own world in a single player game, being able to escape and be whoever I wanted and get away from the internal disgust and hate and all those things that society often made me feel that I was as a black gay guy, right? And so I think
Yep.
through those things that you said are super, super, super empowering and I connect with. And so I think in that thought, especially thinking for me as a black gay man in
Hmm.
society, like, and there's been so many traumatic experiences that I've had. Some maybe, clinically diagnosable as
Hmm.
PTSD,
Hmm.
others may not. And so, like, what is PTSD then in the case of like, how do you know if you maybe like have it?
Okay, so there are a few things that can help you kind of. So, first off, want to preface, it's never recommended to self-diagnose, but
Mhm.
here's how to kind of see or be keyed in with signs and symptoms and perhaps use those to have a dialogue with a mental health provider or a doctor. So, not everybody experiences short-term symptoms. A lot of folks experience long-term symptoms. And symptoms can be a variety of things. So, a flashbacks, dreams, frightening thoughts, intrusive thoughts, re-experiencing of the traumatic event. Um, the re-experiencing is oftentimes hard for people because, especially when individuals are younger, it's kinda hard to identify, "Okay, this was explicitly traumatic for me," you know? A lot of folks don't realize or recognize it as traumatic until the symptoms start hitting in, right? So I would say that those are a lot of the main symptoms. There's also an idea of an kind of the impeding of functioning. So functioning both in social, personal, at work. So an inhibition of functioning, making it difficult to do certain things that are required for like functional life, you know? So those are some of the more larger signs. The other thing, and this is something a lot of people try to be aware of. So are if an event that happens that is very clearly traumatic, i.e., you were in a car accident or you witnessed a murder or something that is stereotypically traumatic, a lot of folks say, hey, before these signs start to show up, perhaps you should talk to somebody. And I'm a very big advocate of that, especially if you're able to have the moment of, oh shit, this was not great for me, whether or not you're given the explicit diagnosis of PTSD, I still think it's great to go talk to your mental health provider just to kind of pre-process potentially, you know?
To touch on that, what I love about that is one, therapy, mental health, whether it's like an actual like long-term modality or like a
Mm,
talk therapy. I think super important. But what I really love about what you said is I feel like with PTS, specifically then when moving into PTSD, like when it's yourself, you may not notice the little
yeah.
subliminal shift that then becomes this huge change over time in the long run that
Mm,
starts to really disrupt your thinking and your behavior in a way. So being able to like start being like if therapy is a regular practice for you, I think that's something that like not only can you address a specific trauma when it happens, but you can also kind of judge and gauge what beliefs has like changed how you see the world differently? How are you acting differently? So I really love the idea of making sure someone goes to therapy after trauma, but specifically having this as a routine in their life,
Yes.
even if taking breaks, but have a routine to seek therapy.
Yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm a very large advocate in just active therapy in general. I believe that most people can benefit from it whether or not they have an explicit diagnosis.
Mhm.
Um, that's sort of this is going a little bit backwards. That's sort of why I've leaned so heavily into kind of gaming as a curative force in therapy. Because my belief is as many barriers to entry that I can break down, the better. So if you believe that people won't understand you because you're a gamer, because you're an otaku, or whatever you want to label yourself, by giving a place where it's like, okay, those things you like, those geekisms are okay here, and you don't need to be afraid of bringing that into the therapy room, then I think that encourages people to take the long term, active, rather constant therapy because they know just from the jump something that they enjoy will not be othered by the therapist.
Yes, love that because we experience othering everywhere else, and so it's
Yeah.
so important. And I think that brings up another thing. I know this is going into more therapy and not PTSD awareness, but like, what are your thoughts on finding therapy? Because I look at therapy, finding a therapist, and therapy in itself like dating, right? Like
Ah,
well, I literally look at it like dating. Like I might see a therapist and be like, "Yeah, I don't like your quirks. You get on my nerves," and I'm like, "You're done next, right?" And like
yeah.
literally, I feel like over my lifetime, I mean, I'm just gonna say it. I've literally been like a hoe, but in therapy, right? And I'm an adult, and I
Fucking
can do
do
that.
it. Do
But like,
it. Hell yeah.
taking times to find that one therapist that like I really connect to this person, right?
Mm,
And
mm.
that gets once I get that involvement, I'm like, I feel safe with this person, like, and it really makes a difference. But sometimes it could take a while to find a therapist, and not every therapist is built for you.
Yeah. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. How we've kind of understood and responded to that, and chosen family therapy in particular, is we do vibe checks. So, how we start is you schedule a 15-minute vibe check with whichever therapist you're interested in, right? And that's a time, at least when I do it, to get to know not just the client, but know myself in reference to the client. And it's the same in the opposite sense. It's for the client to get to know me. My thing is like, fuck yeah, be a hoe. That's how you're paying money for this service. Right?
Right.
So if you don't like the therapist, that's a problem. Don't be paying 250 for a therapist you don't like.
Period.
So that's my bigger thing. And it's like a good therapist, or what I believe to be a good therapist, is not one that'll get offended if a client's like, yeah, no, you're not for me. Because this shit's not my ego trip. I am here to help better you. Our kind of mindset is we help non-conforming folks stay sparkly. So if your shit ain't sparkling when you're talking to me, then find somebody else that will make you sparkle. You deserve that.
Yes.
So I am always very aware and not shy about what I don't know. So if a client comes to me and I know I simply do not have the training to help them in the way they deserve to be helped, I'm not going to fucking lie. I'm just going to say, hey, you deserve somebody who has X, Y, and Z training. Here are some links for people who do, and you deserve to be properly served.
Mhm.
So I I am just a big advocate for therapy is a journey that
Yep.
you take between therapist and client.
Yep.
So if the journey is not going the way you want it, find a journey or that will journey with you in the right way, you know?
Love it. And so, okay, so before we move on to some of this stuff, I want to take a moment. So I'm going to talk a little bit on this
Yeah.
one. I want to make sure that the people that we're talking to, can see other means of like why or what PTSD looks like and different ways that it can show up. And I'm going to use my own disclosure for that, right?
Mhm.
So as you and I were talking prior to hopping on this live, so I'm a disabled Army veteran, and a large portion of my disability rating is PTSD. I did about 15 months in Iraq, and one of the conversations, as I said, that we were having is like, in that diagnosis, like I've been treated for PTSD specific to my military life, right? And it's easy for somebody to think, oh yeah, military, big trauma. So like,
Mm,
yeah, it needs help. But there were other things in my life that people, that we aren't as overt in conversation that I won't, or people won't necessarily talk about, right? In my childhood, I was sexually abused, and it lasted for about a year. So there's that. And then later in life, I was in this severely toxic, abusive relationship, which was physically and mentally abusive. And so there's all these little points where I have these traumatic experiences. But once we got to this last relationship, um, I noticed this major change in me. Like, I stopped trusting people, completely stopped trusting people. If I would meet somebody, my first thought is, what are their intentions with me? Like, why are they being nice to me? What are they trying to get? Are they going to turn around and flip and stop being nice? Are they then going to like hit me? Are they going to like down me and tell me I'm not worthy or whatever it may be? Um, and there was just all these points where I started to like really shift. And it was like slow. Like people, my mom at some point would like tell me like, "Hey, like you're being different. You're treating the family different. Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine." And I never really noticed it until it was like way out here where I was like, "Wow, I used to be an extrovert, and I'm completely an introvert now." Not necessarily now as I process past that, but at the point like I made that realization, I was like, I don't want to be around people because I don't trust people. I don't think they're going to have the best intentions in mind. I stopped being sexual. I stopped wanting to like do all this stuff. Everything that I used to love had changed. And then I also started to use drugs. And I used drugs that, weren't recreational by any means and really started to like destroy my life. And so it's interesting to see, looking back now, how like I can almost pinpoint moments that were like, oh, here's where things started to shift, or at least where I recognize them to shift. But my point in saying all this is like, how then do we look at trauma? Like, how do we scale it and categorize it to say what becomes PTSD and what doesn't? How little does it have to be, or how big does it have to be, or does any of that matter? And can it show up outside of major trauma? And can it come into trauma like if I experience it as trauma as maybe like abusive relationship, whether that be family, friends, or a partner, like like how does this look and like what makes it a trauma?
So, going to one of your points, I think the biggest issue is the societal discourse around trauma. I think, as with a lot of mental health related topics, I think that there is like this normative or okay view of what trauma needs to be. So, when people hear PTSD, they think Army veterans, period, right? They don't go past that because that's what air quotes makes sense to them. So if we categorize trauma, or if the broader society categorized trauma only under one name or one form of symptomology, then every other sort of trauma gets either ignored or denied, right? You'll hear a lot of, oh, can't you just get over it when it comes to like relationship based trauma, familial trauma. So I think the biggest thing we need to do to not only make it easier to access services about trauma, but just to have conversations about trauma in general, is to change the discourse and understanding of trauma. There's no trauma too small or too big to be real to a person. And I think not making it into this small, large, correct or non-correct sort of dialogue is what we need to turn from. So that's my first point. I also think trauma manifests itself in a variety of different ways, and different events can be traumatic for different people. So I think we as a society need to understand that we don't live in a myopic society, right? Your view of what's traumatic is not what I would view as traumatic necessarily, right? So we need to just come to a point of acceptance that we can each have differing opinions and differing experiences of an event. Um, I think this leans itself well to a lot of more like client focused therapy. I know my kind of therapy ethos in particular is understanding or believing that the client, the individual, knows the most about themselves, right? So you are the expert of yourself. And so if you tell me that this event was traumatic, who am I, unless there's some sort of reason, to say that it wasn't? So
Mhm.
I just go with the tacit belief that, okay, you experienced you and you're right. So if you say that this is traumatic, let's process that. Let's go with what you're telling me it is. And I feel like our society doesn't do that. A lot of people who are experiencing very real PTSD will say, well, my trauma does not look like the trauma I found online, or it doesn't look like the trauma I saw in the movie, therefore it's not trauma.
Wait,
And
WebMD isn't accurate tell me that I have PTSD? Is that what you're saying? Or Reddit?
girl, I fucking know. I shocks me. I think I'm Dr. fucking Google up in here, and then I'm told I'm wrong. So I think that that's kind of a shock to a lot of people where it's like, oh shit, Reddit is not the be all end all for medical diagnoses. And no, shockingly, it is not. That Anon does not know what trauma is. Here I am shitting on Reddit like I don't go on Reddit. So,
Reddit answers so many questions for me, by the way.
I essentially replaced my Google with Reddit. Every question has blank, blank, blank question, pause Reddit. So, um, even I use Reddit for those questions. But what I would say is also kind of a shift in how we view ourselves. As I said, I view every client as the master of themselves, and I don't think very many clients view that about themselves personally. And I know that that's a hard thing to say, especially when you're going through a lot of things mental health wise that don't make sense. Saying that you are the master or you know yourself well is hard to come to accept, right?
Yeah.
But I think more acceptance of that knowledge will make it easier for people to say, oh shit, maybe this is not right. Maybe this is different in me. Um, Once again, if we go with the assumption that you know yourself well.
Yeah, I think a big part of that, especially in that idea of like knowing ourselves, sometimes it might be hard to like recognize
Mm,
that something was traumatic, as we've talked about, especially knowing that like as trauma persists long term, it really like it really changes and alters and becomes these like significant limiting beliefs
yep.
and stuck points that literally control how you think about yourself, how you think about the world, and then how you behave. So it may be hard for somebody to want to give themselves the grace to even say, I'm hurting, because
Hmm.
if they feel they're hurting, if they acknowledge that they're hurting, that means that something is wrong.
I agree, and especially as a person of color, I think a lot of the discourse around people of color, specifically Black folks, because I am one, is that there's this inherent belief of strength. It's like the strong Black woman motif.
Yeah,
And it's like if you don't abide by that, then you're suddenly not Black. So where does that leave trauma? Where does that leave a discussion of trauma if experiencing trauma means you're no longer your race?
yeah,
Or you're less so of your race. And so not only are you othered being a person of color, now you're othered by the other folks being marginalized. So I agree. I understand that my statement was a bit optimistic. That's what we try to work toward in therapy, kind of the belief in your personal strength. So say you don't have that and you're still like, okay, where does that leave me? If I can't recognize the trauma, if I don't have anybody to talk to about trauma, I think it goes back to my encouragement of therapy doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. And I want to change kind of that preconceived notion in our society where it's like therapy equals something wrong, equals being mentally unwell. So if we change that to being, okay, you can seek therapy whether or not you have a diagnosis, then I think more people can have trauma kind of processed because then you have a secondary party.
yeah. So I think like what I really want to then move farther into is one, the idea of diagnosis. So what
Mhm.
does that take? But I also want to talk about like your modality of like therapy type. So like I know for me, I most resonate with something that is like a learning based therapy. So for me, like I've thrived and literally changed everything that was hurting doing DBT and CBT.
Mhm.
Um, Other types of therapy hadn't worked as well for me, but when it came to like learning all this information it made me feel empowered. But
Mhm.
there's so many different therapy types out there. I'd be curious to know, like, one, I know gaming is sort of like your modality, and says, I guess I answered my question. But then two, so then what would it take, or how would somebody come to you, and if once they're sitting down and you're like, okay, you're assessing, and you're like, hey, you have PTSD, and then what would that start look like, getting them into your modality and using games? Like, I would like, one, want to know, how do we diagnose somebody, or how are they diagnosed? And then two, let's really now get into the conversation about gaming and how that works and how you see that working.
Okay, so first about diagnoses. So, I use the DSM-5. That's the diagnostic manual that is kind of like the gold standard for therapists. So that lays out specific diagnostic criteria for PTSD and other such diagnoses, and so we follow that. There are various ways in which you can assess for those things. A lot of individuals, of which I sort of lean towards depending on the diagnosis, do assessments. You can do assessments, like full on assessments where you take like questionnaires, or you can do assessments orally, right? Depending on the therapist and depending on the client case, you might want to do that. Um, I personally do not like to diagnose in the first singular session.
Mhm.
I like to do so over a few, just because I think that's most respectful of the client and, in my honest opinion, best practice ethically. Um, so it honestly depends on the diagnoses. I also am very much client centered in that if a client explicitly tells me they thrive with surveys and questionnaires and information, I'm more apt to lean towards those when doing the diagnosis process. If I have a client that just explicitly tells me I fucking hated school and I hate quizzes, so don't give me that shit, that's not how we're going to do it. Right? Because then there's going to be an inherent bias, an inherent factor impacting the validity of the questionnaire if boys like, I don't fucking do questionnaires. So we'll just pivot in a different way. So that kind of leans into kind of my therapy modality. So a lot of my training while as a graduate student was in narrative therapy. So narrative therapy works with the belief that the problem is the problem, the individual is not the problem. So we work on separating the problem from the person so they are no longer one.
Mhm.
I find that to be a very respectful sort of therapy practice, and that I think our society links diagnoses with a person in such a way that you are depression then. And it not only does it limit a person and their personhood, but then say you have said Bob's depression and Bob's depression gets better. Then what is Bob? You've left Bob with no sense of self because you've made his sense of self aligned with an air quote problem. So by externalizing the problem, making it external to the individual, not only does it give the individual a sense of self again, but it also allows us to kind of better process and attack the problem.
Mhm.
Um, I find that works really well with gamer centric therapies because it allows us to better externalize things. So I like to use kind of the example of somebody with depression, right? Um, and we externalize depression as like Ganon, but they are Link. And we know that Link can vanquish Ganon because Link has done it before, right? So it makes depression something that is scary, is difficult, is real in its gravity, but also something that is defeatable. We can do this. And how can we do this? And so by gamifying it, we can put these kind of abstract, oftentimes difficult concepts into words and kind of methods that individuals understand. So I oftentimes like to do like gamifying of different therapy practices where, like, let's say you want to get over a phobia, right? And you do kind of things in which you engage with the phobia and you move upwards, right? So you're leveling up. We'll use terms like that. Or if we're going to do going backwards to our externalization example of defeating Ganon, okay, how would Link do so? Link would do so with the sword. What is your sword? And if your sword is like, okay, my husband's really supportive. And in these moments when depression has me, My husband is able to talk me through it and we can work through it together. Okay, your husband is your sword. Your husband is the second player. Your husband is in your party, right? And so saying things like that make it make more sense to a lot of folks.
So very much using language to help
Yes.
separate and process information that is more relatable. So I know that I love gaming. And so like we will associate words to the games that I play or gaming in general so that I start to have like, especially to the positive and negative things where it's like, okay, I'm just battling a boss here. I got it.
Mhm.
And you
Mhm.
know what? I need to pull out my special sword
Mhm.
so that I can get past depression today or defeat depression, whatever. Um, and then you know to call upon and pull out your special sword, which is also texting your partner to say, "Hey, I'm struggling today."
Yes. The other thing is, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Mental health and therapy isn't always sunshine and rainbows. It's not always easy. So, like, another way to think of it is like, okay, depressions is like the fucking soul's born of your life. And it'll beat your ass down and beat your ass down 50 fucking times and you will die. However, on the 51st fucking time, you did it. So understanding and giving weight to the problem. Like this shit is real and it is not easy. And sometimes you're going to be beaten the fuck down.
Yes.
But if we put words to that, then it becomes far less lonely because you're not the only one getting beaten the fuck down. It's the souls born of the world. We all know it's hard.
Yes.
So I like to do that. We also I also incorporate actual games. So this is something that we're getting off the ground doing sort of play therapy in which it is active. So we're doing like a group D&D campaign in which there's going to be more active game playing in it, and we integrate therapeutic modalities in that. So it can come in different forms, not just talking about it, but actually using it in practice.
Okay, so tell me more about the actual playing of the game in therapy. That one I need help understanding.
No worries. So, we're currently doing tabletop gaming for it just because that's easiest with like HIPAA compliance. So what the group is focused on is it's focused on folks who want to gain societal and social awareness and work on like boundary setting, social interaction skills, right? So, number one, a lot of folks come to me saying that they have trouble interacting with folks in the real world, right? But they're more than able to do it online or just in a normal game, right? And so we have a middle ground now doing a D&D campaign. So it's gamified enough where you feel comfortable and you feel capable, but it also has other actual people there also wanting to learn these skills. So the way we're doing it is multifold. So there's going to be a big emphasis in character creation, just because I also want to have that as a way to kind of process through and offer a space for various parts of you that you want to work out that you can't necessarily do as easily in the outside world. So, say you want to work through your aggression, right? And you want to process through that or at least shed a light on it and see how it can interact or does interact with others. But you can't really easily do that with a friend group. You can't be like, I'm gonna be aggressive as fuck today, or I'm just gonna like shine a light on aggression right now. You might not get invited back to fucking parties. Or maybe you will, depending on the party. But that's neither here nor there. But in the character sheets, we can say, okay, this character, for whatever background, is quite aggressive. And how does that aggression impact their ability to interact and reach a goal? And so we don't shame these things, but we allow them a space to breathe. So that's the first thing. The other thing is the campaign itself is going to be designed to have situations in which boundaries will need to be set and potentially respected for you to be able to move on. You're going to need to consult with others to do this. You can't just do this on your fucking own. Um, so that's sort of how it's coming into practice. The other way is giving a space for people to share gaming with me. So even if we're not interacting together, being like, okay, I want to experience my affirmed gender, but I can't do so safely in where I'm living. So saying, okay, Why don't you play some Final Fantasy 14? Create your character as you want to create it and tell me how that looks. Show me that and tell me why it works. How are you interacting as your affirmed gender there and what does it feel like? So integrating it in that stance as well.
I really like that. I think one of the things on the board game thing brought me to this like moment where I went on a date and it was my date's coworker's house and they're having a board game night. And I can't remember for the life of me what the name of the game was, but essentially we all had to like vote on like
Mm,
what card was what, and it's hard to explain. But as we were going through it, there were points when I found that outside opinion would make me second guess my initial like vote, right?
mhm,
And every time I kept letting this influence of hearing everybody else's opinion and tell me, oh no, you're wrong on that, like, and I would switch my vote, but my vote was right the first time. But like, and so like I was
mm.
really bad at setting boundaries in myself, but also setting the boundary with others of like, I'm good, like
Yeah.
I'm fine, right? And so afterwards, and I didn't really notice until like we were all done, and I was sitting there, I was going like, man, I really let everybody like influence my decisions during this game, and like I was really getting them right. Um, and so it's interesting to hear that like how you can take that experience, but playing with a group of people and be able to sort of like coach and give advice and talk to people or individually about the boundaries and the assertiveness and getting comfortable setting those inner or outer boundaries and whatnot. So I can really see this board game playing as a really solid way to like move into therapy and be comfortable in having conversations, especially in their firminess. Like,
Yes.
I can't tell you how many times a game tells me build a character, and mind you, I do identify as a cisgender male, cisgender man, but in being able to be more comfortable in my own femininity, which has been a battle for me at times. Like I grew up as a high school jock, basketball player in the hood, where like you couldn't be a gay black man in a school full of black and Latino people who would like literally beat the crap out of me and stop being my friend, right? And so
Mhm,
like there was points and times where in my adult life I'm dating somebody and I couldn't hold their hand in public because I was ashamed. And not just
mm,
ashamed of them, which admittedly I was, but also ashamed in myself and of myself, right? And
mm,
sometimes I get on one of these games, Cyberpunk to be example, and I will create the most feminine guy, or sometimes in other games I'll play like a girl,
mhm,
and live out sort of that fantasy. And I've noticed that over time, I've started to the point where now like I'll hold hands and I don't care how feminine somebody is or whatever it may be, like how that has completely changed in just I mean other work, but I know that the games that I've played and be able to have those characters and experience sort of that feminineness in the game has helped me like challenge those thoughts and also like change those behaviors to where I'll have no problem with PDA and all this stuff that in my younger years, because I'm not going to date myself, but you know, up there was a huge problem. And so it's really cool to see that this then can be actual intentional therapy.
Yes. Yes. I agree. I'm very big on encouraging and allowing for how you can present yourself in game. And I'm
Mhm.
also very big on asking and actually wanting to know how my clients present themselves in the game. Because I think it's so easy. So I'll use Final Fantasy, for example. I'm a sexy fucking bunny girl in Final Fantasy. Real talk. If y'all see me, I'm the hot one with like the corset and the bunny ears. That's me. Um, why I say that though is there's a reason behind that. There's a meaning to that. And I think a lot of people will be like, "Oh, it's that bitch with the bunny girl," and that's where they leave it, right? They don't seek, okay, well, why the bunny girl? Why the like Disney Pixar mom curves? Why? Um, and so I seek not to shame, I seek to understand. And I think the easiest thing for a lot of folks in society to do when you see a game character that doesn't make sense is just be like, damn, that's weird. And then just like walk on. But then that leaves so much meaning on the table, so many values that could be explored.
Yeah. So thinking about that and find your Final Fantasy Bunny Girl as an example, like what other games do you think people or you can use like for somebody to engage in self-care and to really like delve into having better depictions of themselves and supporting their mental health?
Okay, so this is going to be an interesting take, because I will preface this by saying that the series is not perfect, but I do quite like the Persona series as far as representations of different facets of life that aren't necessarily talked about, specifically Persona 5 because it deals with sexual assault, um, various abuses, uh, familial abuse, kind of the abuse within schools, the abuse within society, also suicide, depression, a lot of things that a lot of people are grappling with. And it does so in a very interesting way. So there's this concept in therapy called shadow work. It's based on the work of Carl Jung, and it's essentially seeing these shadow parts of you and welcoming and processing them, right? I think Persona does that really well with the mask system, where and also the palace system, where these masks the representation of shadow parts of individual characters. So things that society says are wrong or shouldn't be discussed or shouldn't be experienced, they choose to accept. So when they're dealing with a palace that deals with their abuser or something like that, when they become persona users, they have that moment of ripping off the mask and forming a bond with that part of them. And they're all representations of some sort of feeling. Um, so I think that's a really cool presentation of there are things that society say are wrong, but they can also be the source of strength. Um, so I like that. As far as things that can help you if you're trying to process and just kind of like live, I'm also big on the stereotypical like Stardew, Animal Crossing, things like that. As far as games that I think are interesting depictions of mental health is I'm very big on Disco Elysium just because I think it paints a portrayal of what mental health, specifically intrusive thoughts, depression, can look like. And I think that it can be very affirming in the sense that a lot of people deal with intrusive thoughts, a lot of people deal with the inability to control themselves or feel like they're out of control. And the biggest thing with Harry is a lot of his life is fucking out of control. Even when he's trying to do his best, damn it, he'll try to roll logic and drama will come out and be like, fuck no, and ruin the role. But I think that's very true to how a lot of people experience mental health, where it's like they will want to do something, but for some reason that role didn't work, right? Um, and there's so few depictions of the real want to do something and the failure. And how do we work past that? Because you do in Disco Elysium. There are some instances in which you can die, but oftentimes a failed role just gives a different opportunity to do something else. And then you can come back eventually. Um, I think that's cool for a lot of people because that's very real to the experience. It doesn't really sugarcoat a lot of the mental health experiences people have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Um, what I really love sort of about the whole games and mental health, right? And looking at that is especially when you were talking more about like language and in gaming and how we can kind of like use language in the way that we then talk about our mental health is I almost feel like every moment in our life is almost a different game, right?
Mhm.
And so being able to shape and create a language around that helps for every preceding game that we have to play because as similar to as you just talked about with the game is like life is crazy and mental health is all over the place and like me having gone through so much and working on like depression and my diagnosed PTSD and all these things where there's moments where I'm like I'm feeling good. I'm feeling I'm on the right track. I'm doing yes, yes. Like I'm healed. Yes, right. I'm ready sit there and get my church step on. I don't go to church, but you know what I'm saying. And like, then there's other times that I'm just like, shit, I feel like I'm relapsing. I'm relapsing into some of those old thoughts. I'm relapsing into some of these
Mm,
moments, but where like I didn't use gaming language to help associate some of those my understanding, but I really did other things in a sense that were the same, sort of the same as what you're saying. Like for me, I looked at understanding like emotional definitions and feeling definitions so that I can then be like, okay, am I experiencing, some sort of manufactured emotion here that's now fueling how I'm behaving or think or fueling how I'm thinking and feeling, which is in turn like changing my behavior or whatever. And so to be able to then say, okay, what am I feeling here? What is real? What is not? And when I say what is real and what is not, I'm not saying anybody's experience isn't real, but I'm saying how we're perceiving something, how we're choosing to perceive something can be different than how we should be perceiving something, right? And
yes,
so I really love your idea of taking this whole crazy worldness of our life and all the little individual moments that we have and creating, sort of putting a language behind it that we feel safest with. And I think
yes,
that's the idea of gaming and mental health is finding safety to deal with mental health.
yes. I also am of the mind that it's my job to go to where you're at. So it is never my belief that the client needs to like go up to my level. I need to be where they're at, right? And if where they're at is gaming or if where they're at is needing terms for things, that's where we're going to go. Because once again, what you don't want is you don't want barriers to entry for mental health. And if a language is a barrier to entry, like if you just simply do not understand what the fuck I'm talking about, then you're not going to want to process with me. You don't fucking get me,
Right.
and we don't get each other. So that's why I think it's so important to go to the language the client uses and make sure that they're comfortable there with that.
Very much so. Totally agree. Especially because therapy is scary.
Hmm.
Mental health is scary. Talking about mental health, about your own personal mental health, and showing up to therapy is like, I'd rather sit at home, play video games, and eat my bag of chips.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable as hell, and I'm a
It's
therapist.
uncomfortable.
Shit. Yeah, there's no denying that.
Yes. Okay, so as we sit here, we're kind of closing up on time. I want, so tell me a little bit about um, chosen family therapy, why you absolutely love working there, and how you like came up with the thought or how they were receptive to the thought of one, gaming therapy, like, and then two, really delving into like queerness within gaming and therapy as a whole, because there's instances where a therapist doesn't understand queerness and
Mm.
the identities within it, and will often lead with very like religious dogmatic like ideology.
Yeah, yeah. The horrifying "pray the gay away." Yeah. Uh, so why chosen family therapy? The biggest thing about chosen family therapy is we work once again with the mindset of we help. So actually, when I was perusing job places, I saw their like tagline, we help nonconformists stay sparkly. And I manifest my life as fucking sailor ass moon. My shit be sparkling. So
Yeah.
when I saw that, I was like, I like to sparkle, you like to sparkle, let's sparkle together. Um, so right then and there, I knew that it was a different type of therapy. What I didn't want to be is I didn't want to be a cog in like this medical industrial complex machine. That is not what I wanted. That sounds
Mhm.
horrible. So I found chosen that way. And it is a therapy practice that offers kind of a unique understanding of the person and a unique offering for therapy. So, as I said, I like to believe that we go where the client goes, right? And if the client goes in a way where they just want to talk about their favorite game and that's helpful to them, that's where we're gonna fucking go. And I feel like Chosen gives me the freedom to like, okay, you like gaming? How can we do gaming in therapy? So that was my biggest thing. How I came up with this? Your bitch likes the game. Shit. If I'm gonna make this my life and my profession, you know that old timey phrase of like, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life.
In your life.
Um, I mean, shit. I like to game. I like to talk about gaming, and I like to understand why people game. So I figured, okay, I like to do this, and people like doing it too. So why not offer that? The other thing is, I know how vilified in society gamers, otakus, geeks, and nerds tend to be. A lot of people just want to pin that on this is the source of your problems. If you didn't like anime, you'd have friends. And I know that because that's what people did to me. And so I was like, it's not, anime has made me a better person. Fuck, Naruto has taught me morals. So,
Yes.
exactly. Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Like, I've learned a lot of shit about friendship. Like, friendship is the friend that made along the fucking way. I learned things from anime
Yeah.
and gaming experiences. And so I'm like, if we're denying people that, then we're doing them a deeper disservice. And so I never wanted to deny the value of these things to people. Because then who and what am I? I'm not offering therapy, man. I'm just as judgmental as somebody you're not fucking paying. And you shouldn't pay for judgment. Real talk.
At all. What I love about chosen family therapy as a name is I think I'm saying it makes me what like makes my mind go to okay, like the founders of it, were they queer people? Because chosen
Yep,
family is such a solid name within queerness historically, right? I mean, this is why as people of color in the ball scene, they have houses because it's always been about chosen family, especially to those who are often get kicked out because of their gayness, their queerness, their lesbianness, whatever it may be, right? And so just the name alone, when I read it, was like, oh, this sounds off the bat like a safe space.
it is. We are an LGBTQ run and founded therapy practice. So that is something we pride ourselves on. We pride ourselves on offering a place for folks who have felt other. So you don't have to be LGBTQ. You can be whatever sort of marginalized or anything. And you don't even have to be marginalized. You can walk up here like OC soccer mom. I don't mind. The whole thing we do, the whole thing we do is we offer a safe space for all. Like, because that's what I want to give people, honestly. I want to give people a space to be themselves. And whatever themselves is, bring that shit to the room. I don't mind.
Yep, love that. And by the way, if anybody was wondering, yes, OC soccer moms do have real mental health issues too.
Yeah,
They do. They do.
yeah.
But so in closing, like, is there anything that you want to add? Any final pitch? Any like final passion you want to share? Is there anything that if you can touch one person out in this digital landscape, what would you want them to leave knowing?
I want them to leave knowing that they are valued and they are worth therapy. Um, I think a lot of people once again demonize folks who reach out for therapy, but you're honestly worth it. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. That doesn't mean you have a diagnosis. You're worth having a space in which you are the focus and you matter and your words matter. So if you're just using therapy as a place to go so that somebody can listen to you, damn it, you deserve that. Whatever it is you want out of therapy, you fucking deserve to have it. So that's my biggest thing. You deserve good therapy and you deserve to be given a space in which you can be you.
Yes, absolutely. And one last thing came to mind. I think this is a conversation
Mhm.
for offline, but I never give a shit. And so we're gonna have a little bit of it here before we close. But that is one, and I think it's relevant because therapy is a barrier, especially when it comes to money. So,
Mhm.
like, how does chosen family therapists choose to work with people?
Mhm.
Do they have programs that help subsidize some of the cost? And then in last thought, those are questions for you. And in
Mhm.
last thought, my statement is I'm really excited about progressing and having offline conversation. Um, because one of my interests and raise interest as the leaders of the organization are working with an organization where we can apply for grants that help subsidize the costs for
Mhm.
people in our community to someone, to an agency, to I don't want to say an agency, to a chosen family, um,
Yeah.
to help provide them those therapy services, whether it's talk therapy or a modality-based therapy or whatever it is that they're seeking. And so I think that leads into those questions of like, how do y'all currently? Because
Mhm.
we're gonna work on making sure we can get the community some decrease the barrier there. But how do you currently work with people if they wanted to come see you? How do they do that?
Okie dokie. So I'm currently accepting clients. Come at me. I'd love to see you. Um, we do sliding scale rates. So there's always a conversation about what is sustainable on a weekly basis. So we do have like legit printed rates for sessions, but I also, after I do a vibe check, if it's clear that the vibe check has worked, what I'll do is I'll turn back and say, okay, what is a sustainable amount for you to pay on a weekly basis? So we always have that dialogue first. The other thing is we offer sliding scales for our gender affirming services. So that therapy does sometimes have a wait list just depending on the amount of clients each individual has. But as far as gender affirming care, like letters and things like that, that's something we try to not turn people away for. Because we believe, at the very least, you should have a practitioner willing to affirm what you need to have affirmed, right? And we don't turn people away due to cost for that. But we do always have conversations about cost when it comes to scheduling sessions. So we do sliding scale, suffice to say.
Okay. And so where are you located? Or how does somebody then like do they have to come see you physically? Or is there some sort of gaming centric kind of way where they don't have to show up?
So I feel home is comfortable. So we have multiple options. I can work within California. So just because the limitations of license here, you can only work within your state. So I can see individuals within California and we can do virtual or we can do in person. Virtual's super common. I like virtual. It's cozy. So we offer virtual sessions. And if you want to come to Fullerton, I have a nice ass office. I got candles, everything. So, we
Do you
also
have
have
candy?
in-person. Oh, girl, I said candles. I mean, I can procure some candy. I don't wanna be promising candy and not having none. I have a Keurig over there. I got some coffee, I guess. Um, but I got some candles. It has scent. So we have scented candles, no candy. But whatever will draw you in. So we do both. We do in person and we do virtual. Virtual being the most common.
Okay, perfect. Well, Mariah, I completely am so happy to have gotten to talk to you and to learn to advocate and to have a discussion around PTSD for this awareness month. Mind you, I never knew that there was awareness month for it, but I'm so happy that we've had the day to talk about it. Absolutely. And then, real quick plug, we
Mhm.
at Qweerty Gamers have a United for Pride fundraiser. Ray has, or Ratings has been putting in that into the chat. If you want to support the organization, please feel free. Leave whatever you want, $1, $1 million. We're happy either way. If you really got $1 million, you ain't got
Yeah.
to do there. Hit us up, and we'll handle that internally. But nonetheless, again, thank you so much. And any closing words? I'll let you have the last word and close this out.
I have so appreciated having a platform to kind of discuss my passions, to discuss therapy. I think the biggest thing I want to let folks know is I understand therapy is a scary process, but not all therapists are scary. There are folks that genuinely want to help and genuinely want to give you a space to be you. I like to think I offer that. Even if you don't like me, trust that there are people who will offer that for you. So don't be afraid of therapy. There are great ones amongst us.
Yep. There are great ones, whether it's Mariah or someone else, but they're awesome. Go this way. Or I
Yeah,
don't
but
know what you
Mariah's fucking cool, I gotta say.
do. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, But other than that, thank you for attending and watching and listening, however you were doing it, to another Qweerty Gamers event. Thank you. I'm happy I got to host another one. And until next time, see y'all later.
She was watching me and didn't know I did it, so I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that one.
Already gotta gamble with us.
I'm too poor. I have 20,000 gold.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I only have 27K.
Hey! Hi, Chris.